Some people may say hand tool only woodworking is slow and tedious. Well, I'm here to tell you it's also exhausting. Just kidding. It's actually a lot of fun, a great way to mix things up in the shop. So let's make a neat little project and let's do it unplugged. So here's our material for the project. It's going to be primarily ash. We're going to use some walnut also on the drawer fronts. I think I'm going to start with the sides of the piece. So I'm going to flatten one of these faces and then I'll resaw those two sides out of it. Now the sides of our shelving unit are going to be 3/8 of an inch thick. So I'm setting my marking gauge to 1/2 inch. I will scribe around the piece of wood, I will resaw it, and then that'll give me enough leftover material to be able to clean it up and not shoot past that 3/8 inch thickness that I'm looking for. I'm going to use a Japanese Ryoba saw to do this resawing, and if you're having trouble getting the cut started and no one's looking, use the crosscut side. Do a couple of swipes, you'll get the curve going, switch over to the rip teeth, and it'll be a lot easier to get going. With our resawn board, I'm now going to mark 3/8 of an inch all the way around. That'll be our final thickness. That's what we'll plane down to. All right, with both boards taken down to 3/8 of an inch, we can now cut them down to the proper length and width. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to use my edge plane. I'm going to joint one edge on both pieces, and then I will rip it down to the proper width, clean that up, and then take it to the shooting board and get it down to the proper length. All right, the edge plane is neat because it has a built-in 90-degree fence, allowing you to get a perfect 90-degree jointed edge. I'm at the shooting board. My reference edge is going to be the one I hit with the edge plane earlier. That's going to go up against my fence. I can now shoot this short end to make it a perfect 90 degrees to that long edge. And when that's done, I can work on the remaining two edges. I hope that made sense. The length we're going for is 8 3/4 inches. I'm going to make sure I'm measuring off this square edge. There we go. Let me just bring that around. Boom, boom. And I left a little bit extra so I could now square it up on the shooting board. And brought it right down to my line. So with this long edge and these two short edges ready, we just have this one remaining edge. What we're going to do, we're going to use this as a reference against our fence, that short edge. We can now shoot that last remaining edge with the shooting board and bring the piece down to its final width, and both long edges should be nice and parallel to each other. So we have our sides at their finished dimensions. Those are ready to go. I went ahead and did the same thing to get our horizontal dividers. The only thing, these are 11 inches long. In the assembled piece, these will be 10.5 inches long. Why the extra 1/2 inch? We're going to be putting 1/4 inch tenons on either end, which will fit into corresponding mortises on the side pieces. Marking gauge set to 1/4 inch, and I'll just scribe the ends. So all the waste is removed between the tenons. Now I just need to work on the cheeks. I'm only removing about a 32nd of an inch from either side. What I'm going to do, I'm going to reestablish my baseline with the marking gauge. I'm really going to bear down on it, try to get it as deep as I can. Then I'm going to come in with a router plane set at a 32nd of an inch. And I'm going to come in hoping my baseline is deep enough that when the router plane meets that baseline, the waste will just pop away. No further chiseling necessary. That's the plan. Let's give it a shot. That worked fairly well. I'm a little bit over. I'm at 0.252, but I'm going to live with it because I'm not going to be able to accurately adjust the router plane to take an additional thousandth off of each side. It's not happening. So if I have to give it a sanding later to fit in the mortise, I'll do that. And speaking of mortises, let's knock those out. We have one of our side pieces underneath the holdfast. I scribed 2 lines, 1/4 of an inch apart from each other, the thickness of the tenons. I'm now going to hold up the horizontal divider up to that so I can mark the location of the tenons, and then I can get on with excavating the waste. To get these mortises going, I'm going to drill out as much of the waste as I can. I'm going to use my Bridge City Toolworks palm brace. First time I'm using it, and I think I bought it about 4 years ago because it's shiny and I'm a big dummy with no willpower. I'll drill out the waste, come back in with a chisel, and clean things up. All right, I'll come back in the morning and I'll start on the 2 dovetail drawers. We'll fit a divider in between them. And also we'll start shaping the sides and breathe some life into this piece. All right, see you in a few. All right, new day, and I hope to get a lot done. Before we work on the divider that's gonna go here, I'm gonna rip a 1/16 of an inch off of these 2 front edges to give us a nice offset from the sides. Up until this point, we kept everything the same width because it made lining up the joinery much easier, the mortises and tenons. But with those out of the way, we can now do those setbacks. Now for the divider, we're gonna need to make a couple of stop dados. We're gonna put one on top of the bottom shelf and one on the bottom of the top shelf. One here and one here. So we have our top and our bottom shelf. What I'm gonna do, flip the top one over so both faces that are getting the dado are facing up. I'm gonna line these up as best I can and then strike a line to work on the dado. We need to be accurate here because if the line is off from one to the other, our divider will be boop when it's installed. So I measured out the center of the board, then I made a mark a 1/16 of an inch to the left and the right of it. I'll now strike those lines and that'll leave us a nice 1/8 inch layout for our dado. I went over my pencil line with a knife to give my chisel something to register into. I'm just going to make it a little bit deeper. And then I will remove the waste with a narrow chisel and that small router plane. All right, let's work on the divider. I milled up some material for it. We're gonna have the grain running vertically, and we're doing that for 2 very good reasons. If we run the grain horizontally, any wood movement would be going in this direction. It would be pushing against these shelves, and it might bind up the drawers or cause some unsightly gaps. And the second reason is purely aesthetics. If we ran the grain horizontally, then end grain would be facing out. And when we applied finish, it would get noticeably darker than the surrounding ash and it would look a bit off. Our shelves are set back 1/16 of an inch from the sides, and I want the divider to be set back 1/16 of an inch from the edge of the shelf. So I have a square set up with a 1/16 of an inch measurement. Let me butt the divider up against it. Now I'll just mark where the rabbet ends. We'll notch that out, and we should be dead on. All right, let's just slide it in, double check our measurements, and we're good. So before we sand this and glue it up, let's go at it with some hand tools and make things a bit more interesting. I gave myself lots of layout lines. We're going to be beveling the sides, we'll be beveling the inside of the legs, we'll put a curve on the top, and we'll put another curve on the bottom where the feet will be. I think it's going to look really good. Let's do it. With the tapering out of the way, we now could add a curve to the top and the bottom of the piece. I struck a horizontal line, that way I could line up my curve so it'll be even all the way across. And to lay out that curve, I'm going to use a very traditional layout tool, my wife's bundt cake pan. So all the parts for this assembly I sanded to 320. Now I'm just adding some chamfers, breaking some edges, and then I'll do some pre-finishing and the glue up. For these short pieces of end grain, I just have some sticky back sandpaper on a flat piece of wood, and that way I don't risk any blowout. And I don't have a spoke shave that'll fit in there, so I'm just going to use some sandpaper wrapped around a number 2 pencil. All right, let's glue up this assembly. Got my clamps ready, my glue. I'm going to use Type Bond 3. Pretty straightforward glue up. Let's knock it out. With this out of the clamps, I applied a couple of coats of finish and we're good to go. Now we're going to work on our 2 dovetail drawers. The sides and bottom, we're going to do maple. At first I was thinking of doing more ash, but it just seemed a little too busy for my taste, so maple it is. I have this piece of figured walnut, has a little bit of curl to it. We're going to use this for the drawer fronts, and it's long enough that we can cut both drawer fronts out of it, and the grain will run continuously all the way across. I think it's going to look really nice. So let's get started cutting some really tiny dovetails. When laying out dovetails, I usually use a 1 6 angle, but with dovetails this short, they're 1/4 of an inch long, I went with a more exaggerated 1 4 angle. It's a very subtle difference, but I do think it looks a touch better. And it's times like this, I'm really glad I have an 1/8 inch chisel. With the half blinds out of the way, we're really near the finish line. I need to make some grooves on the drawer sides for the drawer bottoms to slip into. I'm going to use my plow plane for that. Quick tool recommendation, resin jaw pliers. These things are great for adjusting the thumb screws because unlike regular pliers, they won't chew them up. And unlike your thumbs, you'll actually be able to get it nice and tight without having to worry about the fence slipping on you. I'll leave a link in the description, not sponsored. I just think they're real handy to have around. Now these parts are too narrow, so I can't use my tail vise to hold them down. So I'm just going to use some double-sided tape. This is carpet tape, works great, and it'll keep the parts in place as I'm making the groove. With the grooves done, I was able to cut the backs of the drawers to width. I laid out a couple of dovetails. We'll knock those out, and then we'll glue these 2 drawers up. Before I glue up the drawer, a couple of quick wash coats of shellac, which will also help cleaning up any squeeze out later. It'll pop right off. So we're wrapping things up with the shellac finish on the drawers. I did do a couple of rounds of grain filler because this figured walnut was super porous. So a couple of rounds of that, a few coats of shellac, then we'll rub it out with wax. The whole time I was making this project, I was envisioning using these little brass poles that I've had for a long time. And when it finally came time to install them, I stuck them on with double stick tape to be sure I really liked the way they looked. And it turned out I didn't. I thought they were a little too big and a little too bold for a project of this scale. So I decided to try a couple of different directions. A second option was a finger notch. So I made a little mock-up And while I thought it was an improvement over the brass knobs, I thought it was a little too basic. I love this for shop furniture, but for this piece, I wanted something a little bit more. So that's when I decided to cheat, and I fired up my lathe and I turned 2 tiny walnut drawer pulls. I'm sorry, I ran out of ideas. With this option, I think I hit that Goldilocks zone I was aiming for. Not too subtle, not too bold, just right. And here it is in our family room underneath a picture of my beautiful wife and me with a lot more hair, ready to display all sorts of stuff, like a bird I carved a while back, or mom and dad, or priceless artwork. And 2 drawers sized to fit anything from car keys to AA batteries to a tube of chapstick. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.